onset, let me just say a couple of things about this report. We did this before I assumed office at the NSEB 2011, and if I recall right, at that time Clarissa was just married, but yeah, you just got married then, and now you already have 2 kids. The second kid is already a year old. So it's been a while. This report is really based on, as I point out here, 2005 to 2009 data. And so you might say, so why are we going to present something that's very old? Well, partly it serves as a good way of finding out what happened before. And now that we have new available data from both DepEd as well as the Philippine Statistics Authority. I see here Benny Yabut, who is in charge of the Annual Poverty Indicator Survey. So if you want to buy the APs, you would try to ask it from her. But anyways, so that's the context. No? We are going to present, I'm going to just say the main report, but Claire will be providing information more on the epilogue, you might say, what happened after we wrote this report 4 years ago. So anyway, this is the structure of my report, of my presentation, much of which is the same style of the presentation in the actual report. Just to introduce, the study, there was way back in 2008, UNESCO was already saying that there's a really big problem as far as out-of-school children. An estimated 142 million children, 68 million of whom are primary school age, 74 million are lower secondary school age. And if you start looking, if you examine in particular in 2008, admin data of DepEd was already saying at that time that there were about 3.3 million children between the ages of 5 to 15. Both DepEd data and DSW data combined. And you will see a number of, some idea of the profile of the out-of-school children. But this is based on geography by, as I said, the out-of-school children. In other words, it's the residual because DepEd comes up with what's known as a net enrollment ratio, which is the proportion of children of a school age in relation to school-age children. So they get their data combined with the PSA's population projection on school-age population. So that is the net enrollment ratio. But then the residual, 1 minus that, is the proportion of children who are not in school, roughly. Okay. So anyways, if you start looking at the trends, even from 2008 into 2010, even at that time, we were already noticing, oops, there seems to be a drop in the figures, no? Even 2008 to 2010. But we wanted to point out, even when we were examining this data, is that it appears that many of the education outcomes are also an issue of resources. If you give more resources to DepEd and to the SWD, which is addressing the demand side issues of why children are not in school, largely economic, then you will expect things to improve. And in fact, that's what Claire will be showing later. That there's good news. People always say it's not just because many times when the PSA releases data about national income accounts and we say growth, we don't feel that growth. That's, well, you actually feel it, you just don't see it. You're not examining what needs to be examined. And this is what we'd like to say. As far as education information is concerned, there seems to be some very good news. Anyways, during the time we were studying things, we were using the framework of a global study. There were about 2,000 countries that were requested to do country studies. Philippines was one of them, in large part because they noticed we do have a number of out-of-school children as of 2008. And so we at PIDS were asked to examine particularly the so-called three dimensions of exclusion, looking at primary and pre-primary school age. The secondary school age we did not touch at that time because of resource issues, and we wanted to put in a way, the MDG idea was to have all children finish primary school, 100%. That was the target. So that's why we were focusing more on the primary age school population and the pre-primary age. Anyways, so we were doing both mixed methods approach for the study, doing a little bit of desk review, analysis of available data from DepEd, from DSWD, from the then NSO on their annual poverty indicator survey and other household surveys, as well as we did a little bit of primary data collection, doing some qualitative data investigations, doing interviews of children, parents, teachers, principals in selected areas throughout the country. And even some of the officials, staff agencies, both LGUs, DSWD, we were interviewing many of them to just get some information, which you will not see in surveys. And we were also observing, because one of our members of our team was an educator, so she was looking at issues of how children were being taught in school. We were noticing a couple of things like who sits in front, who sits at the back, because that's also might be one of the reasons why some children are dropping out of school. So we looked at instruction materials. So there were lots of things that we were examining. All right, so this is the to give us guidance. There was an advisory group set up by DepEd and together with many of the stakeholders in the education sector. And also there was a technical working group that in addition was guiding us in the production of the report. Okay. So anyways, that having been said, let me now give you some of the things that you might say, why only now? Well, in fairness, many of these things were already being presented in little bits to the stakeholders. So the report was already circulated within DepEd, and I think many people within DepEd were doing the job head-on, even if it was not officially accepted. But let me give you highlights of some things that we discovered about quote-unquote excluded children. As far as 2008 annual poverty indicator survey that Benny Yabut is in charge of, we estimated that there were about close to 3 million children between the ages of 5 to 15, and 60% of them were boys. If you start breaking it down, about 700,000 were 5-year-old children, 1.27 million were primary school age, so 6 to 11 years old, 807, but close to a million were secondary school age. But if you, as I said, look at another data source, DepEd's data with DSWD data, it would not match, but it's nearly the same. It's about slightly higher than 3 million, slightly higher to about 3 million kids. And when we start examining, why did we examine more the 80s survey rather than the DepEd data? Because for obvious reasons, children out of school are not in the DepEd data. They're a residual. So you cannot profile them, you cannot describe based on admin data. So we were looking at the household surveys. And we will notice that close to 50% of these out-of-school children were really coming from the very poorest children, poorest households. The bottom 20%. 65% are in the rural sector. Many of them have mothers with low educational attainment. Also, if you start drilling down on 5-year-old kids, many of these 776,000 children, about 2/3 of them were in rural areas. Half were coming from the very poor, and more boys than girls. 4 in 5 were reportedly, when being asked in the 80s, were asked, why are they not in school? They were said to be too young for schooling. What do you mean too young? Siguro hindi naaabot yung tenga. No? That's the usual way when children are being asked, can you go to school? They will ask the mobility indicator if the kid can reach the ear. And And then the residual, a big part of the residual are said to quote-unquote lack interest. And of those who said to be young in school, 50% are from the poor. And then ARM had the highest proportion of 5-year-old children who were not in school. Now, going to the primary and secondary age children who were not in school, about 2.2 million of them, about 1.3 million are primary school age, about 900,000 are secondary school age. Boys seem to be outnumbering girls. The bulk is between the ages of 6 and 7 years old. At that time, DepEd still did not implement universal primary education, and you must understand that context, no? And I think there was also some confusion on when is grade 1. Because even me, when I was in grade 1, if I recall right, I was 7 years old. But then in 2000, there was a change. You should be in school by age 6. But I think some people still got confused. No? So anyways, suffice to say, I think we were observing that even in our field visits, that some people did not quite understand and needed re-clarification from their end. What else? We pointed out that we did a little bit of a simulation. What if all of these 6-year-old and 7-year-old children were in school rather than not being in school? Then primary school attendance would shoot from 90% all the way to 98%. So we knew that even then, that one of the big ways of making sure that we put these numbers down is to focus on the grade 1, the primary, the kindergarten, no? As will be more reported, as I said by Clarissa later, there will be various good news. I will not, maybe you can go through the slides in detail. No? This is just giving you an idea again of more or less what's going on. It's economic, it's boys being more, etc., etc. But especially when it comes to secondary age students, children, it appears that the disparities between boys and girls starts to really increase as the children age. And you might think, well, it's natural because if they're in rural areas, they'll be expected to contribute to the household income. And in fact, our own investigations in the field validated that many times the boys were expected to contribute. But it appeared, though, that it became more an after effect of the fact that they were no longer in school. It is not the main reason. It seems that there is an issue of lack of interest that needs to be addressed also. That more boys are really finding it difficult to stay in school because they maybe find something in the curriculum that may not be that interesting for them. No? Anyways, again, you see the primary age OOSC problem to be more of an ARM issue, but when you start going to secondary age children, it's more, the bulk is in Eastern Visayas, also still in ARM, plus a little bit in Mimaropa. Alright. Child labor is more an issue, a characteristic of secondary age children than primary age children. We're estimating about 1 million children were somehow engaged in some kind of activity, economic activity. I wouldn't really call it child labor because, you know, the term child labor has connotations, bad connotations. But if you have your kid who is in media, you know, he or she is still working, so that's not really child labor. But you know, so I would even not like to call it child labor. But anyways, they are engaged in some kind of activities. But as I said, the decision to work appears to be more coming after the kid has dropped out of school. There are also, in addition to these children who are out of school, some students who might be at risk of dropping out. We estimated that there were about 5.3 million children in primary school at that time were overaged by at least 2 years. There were also some 660,000 primary and secondary age students who might be at risk of dropping out. So anyways, their profile seems to be very similar also to the profile of out-of-school children. So which means that, again, it's an economic issue, it's a gender issue, among other things. So what specifically are the barriers and bottlenecks to schooling? Clearly, we noticed partly it's economic, poverty. Second is at that time, the perceptions of school readiness of the very young kids, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 7-year-olds, that they are, quote, too young for schooling. Other issue is the education of mothers. So poorly educated mothers tend not to, the other way around. The out-of-school children tend to have poorly educated mothers. Now, is it a cause or an effect? I mean, you might think that women, as we were trying to investigate further, there's a whole variety of things because, you know, we expect too much from women. Women carry, even among the poor, they carry such a big burden on their backs. They are expected to be the other teacher. So if there is difficulty in explaining problems in school, they go to the mother, and if the mother cannot explain to the kid, then maybe the kid starts losing interest. But the other thing too is that there really are apparently some household different expectations of boys and girls. We mentioned a couple of things in the report: poverty, as I said, school readiness. Many were viewed among the children between especially 5, 6, and 7 years old as being too young, and part of this lack of these children who lack readiness typically will eventually drop out by the first month of the school year, and it will consequently affect the so-called school leaver rates or dropout rates, or even repeat. They might be repeating early on. The parents' educational attainment and also the livelihoods of success in the educational system is very well cited in the literature. But it's not just that while we were seeing that our econometric analysis was suggesting the importance of the education of the mother, still there's something much more into this. The extent of women's involvement will depend on certainly her educational attainment, but unfortunately, these women may not have the luxury of time nor the capacity to support their children's education, especially through lessons at home, or if there are parent consultations and things like that, bringing the child to school. It's always the woman who has to bring the child to school. No? And what if kulang? What if there is very little money in the household? They're still expected to find other means to feed the family. No? So clearly, this is something that DepEd, together with DSWD and other state education stakeholders, we need to sort of think about, because right now there isn't quite a systematic education, not campaign, but more of a way of improving the education, the capacities of parents, especially women. No? Also, we mentioned this issue about gender issues. It might seem as though they're minimal, but when you start disaggregating data, you will see that it's really a real problem. Boys are less likely to reach grade 6 on time, more prone to repeat at grade 11, and even another survey of the Philippine Statistics Authority suggests that among children aged 10 to 15, boys tend to have a lower functional literacy than girls. Sorry, that should be girls, than girls. And then even in the NAT, at least for the data from 2005 to 2009, girls are doing better than boys in all areas. Traditionally, it was just in communications, and then the boys will do better in science and math. but now it's the data from 05 to 09 suggests it's everywhere, no? All factors. So our fieldwork suggests that some factors that are affecting the underachievement of boys would include the parents and the teachers' low expectations of boys, and also some kind of passive classroom experiences. They somehow expect everybody to be very disciplined, you know? And if not, you know, even the way they order the kids inside the classroom, just try to observe. You will know that there are real gender issues. And perhaps because to some extent, 90% of our teachers are women, there might be also an issue of role models, the lack of role models among the boys. So there are gender issues that are permeating basic education, and that's why we have a special chapter in this report, analysis of why boys do poorly, but I won't go into too many details. So we also reviewed many policies and strategies at DepEd, from the school readiness to this issue about official school age entry, to you know, some kind of suggestion about, there was even some idea that maybe it's because of the birth certificates. You know, we looked at all of these things, no? But we made all these suggestions, both to address supply side issues as well as even demand side issues, economic barriers that clearly, where, you know, the CCP should be probably the best way of addressing these demand side issues. But I mentioned this earlier, that it would be important to have some kind of continuing education for parents, especially mothers, whose education attainment might be one of the determinants of the lack of school participation. So finally, you know, we had ways forward. We were giving a set of recommendations, 48 of them, to address various demand side issues. I won't go through everything in detail. Please read the report if you're very interested. But let me point out that because this was already well circulated within DepEd, and I really congratulate the department for doing its job. No? Many of the suggestions by far were actually already implemented throughout though there might be still some that might need to be addressed, but by and large, many appear to have been addressed. No? Things like even truancy, you know, local officials being the ones empowered to enforce laws on truancy, making kids go to school, or the design of the 4 Ps, giving better incentive for boys than girls. These are things that may be beyond DepEd, but DepEd will need to also advocate together with other stakeholders. And I see some people from DSWB are here. All right. Anyways, and we mentioned the issue of a very feminized school system currently. Maybe there might be a need for an advocacy with CHED for establishing targeted scholarships for males, as was done already in Australia. Some kind of affirmative action also in the short term to hire more males into the bureaucracy. After all, especially now, we're moving towards full implementation of K-12. Then we note that even the donors like UNICEF has been giving also extra support to DepEd on certain things like having an assisted teacher training on child development principles and learner-centered approaches. So they become more gender sensitive. What else? Supply side issues. Many of these things perhaps have been addressed or are in the process of being addressed by DepEd. But even ECCD workers, so many of these things, as I said, I won't go through many details. In fact, I'll probably give more of the floor to Clarissa to give an accounting of what happened after. Let me just end all of this with acknowledgements to the PIDS country team, the Philippine country team that guided this work, as well as the research team. Claire is here, Lucy Lasso, I don't know if she's around, Cher Monterola is in the process of coming home. She and her husband are in Singapore, but anyways, we also had some help from Vic Pacquiao, and then we had a number of research staff, both from DepEd and PIDS, who contributed a lot. And of course, let me not forget to mention all the field staff from DepEd, the LGUs, who were very helpful, and also the children, parents, teachers, school heads who we interviewed to be able to get to understand this better. Maraming salamat po.